I think the top priority really now is for people in the nuclear world to be thinking more holistically about how nuclear weapons fit in or don't to the current environment, and thinking about how can we make common cause with others who share our vision of a more peaceful and secure world, and how can we redirect that spending to these other areas to more meaningfully improve people's lives.
That's the voice of Dr. Emma Belcher, president of Ploughshares Fund. She's today's very special guest on Press the Button, a Ploughshares Fund podcast dedicated to nuclear policy and national security. And now, here are your co-hosts, Michelle Dover and Tom Colino.
Welcome back to Press the Button after what I hope was a fantastic Labor Day weekend for everyone. Tom, did you get to do anything fun?
Well, hi, Michelle. I was actually down in Brooklyn, New York, helping my daughter move her apartment, bringing her back up to New Hampshire. So yes, it was a lot of activity, a lot of fun. And I'm now excited to get back into it because today we have a very special episode. Michelle, please tell us more about it.
Absolutely right. Instead of your regularly scheduled programming, we are dedicating this episode to a feature-length interview with Dr. Emma Belcher, the new president of Ploughshares Fund. Don't worry, though. Early warning and everyone's favorite nuclear Q&A segment will be back next week.
In our interview, we talk with Emma about her analysis of what it feels like at this critical moment of American foreign policy, where we are teetering on the edge between a new Cold War and a renewed push for greater global cooperation.
We also get her take on the dangers and opportunities in today's world and what should be the top priorities for those who care about reducing nuclear risks. It's a fantastic interview, and you'll be hearing much more from Emma soon.
As always, please click the subscribe button and give us a rating. And if you like the show this week, please tell just one person about it. Your support makes what we do possible.
With that, let's get into today's special episode. The clock is ticking. Today, Tom and I sit down with Dr. Emma Belcher, Ploughshares Fund's new president. Prior to arriving at Ploughshares, Emma spent nearly a decade at the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, where she led the foundation's Nuclear Challenges grant-making program. There, she developed and built the foundation's Nuclear Challenge Big Bet team, all the way from ideation to planning to management of its nearly $20 million budget. Before that, she served in a variety of roles in and outside of government, including as a Stanton Nuclear Security Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations and as an advisor in Australia's Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet on National Security and International Affairs. Emma, welcome to Ploughshares and welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thanks, Tom. It's really a thrill for me to be here in my new capacity at Ploughshares as president.
Emma, you're taking the helm at Ploughshares Fund at what feels like, in a lot of ways, a critical, pivotal moment. One where we here in the United States are deciding between doubling down on international isolation and geopolitical tension or pushing toward greater global cooperation. What do you make of this moment?
Well, Tom, you're absolutely right. We're certainly at a critical, pivotal point, and we see how recent events have exacerbated global trends, including growing geopolitical tensions. Yet at the same time, the situation necessitates cooperation on a global scale to effectively manage these threats. But I think, unfortunately, what we're seeing is really an inability to solve problems at a global level, really seen in the sort of failure to address COVID-19 properly. And this is really particularly concerning. So if we look a little bit at these global trends, we see rising populism, nationalism, and domestic polarization that undermine support for global cooperation. We see declining trust in government, high level of disinformation, growing inequalities inside countries and among them, and then the sort of resulting stock market volatility from COVID-19 and its impacts, and the rising unemployment, decreasing GDP, resulting social insecurity and instability. And we've got the ever-present problem of climate change and politics and economics around that. So we see these global trends and global tensions between the US and China based on Chinese territorial claims and military adventurism. We see trade wars looming, tensions between the United States and Russia, the two main powers with nuclear weapons, as you well know. And we see China-India border tensions between Iran and the United States, and protests in Belarus that threaten to bring in Russia. So we have really a sort of a perfect storm in a way of tensions and trends that have been exacerbated by COVID-19 and an inability to handle global issues in a global way. So I think it's really easy to look at this laundry list of tensions and trends with despair and look at the lack of global response and uneven outcomes to COVID-19 around the world and think that we're really doomed and that multilateralism has failed, and it would seem the right thing to do to retreat, to become more isolationist and to focus on domestic well-being and policies without really sort of looking at the big picture. But I think there's a real danger in that. We've really seen how the kinds of challenges that we face globally today, we're not going to be able to manage without effective global response and cooperation. And I think what that depends upon is leadership. And that's something that we've really been lacking recently.
In thinking about this, I've been struck by Stuart Patrick's recent article in Foreign Affairs about how it's kind of tempting to say that multilateral institutions are doomed to fail when they're needed most, but that it's not a failure of the institutions themselves. We've seen how they've worked in the past with respect to issues like the global financial crisis. But what we see, though, is that we've failed to really equip the multilateral institutions to deal with current challenges. And that's also been a result of the kind of lack of leadership that we've seen.
I think, we look at this, it's a bit overwhelming and despairing, but there are opportunities now to take the moment that we're in and to be looking at how we can actually really address some of these challenges.
Tell us more about those opportunities.
Well, I think right now what we're seeing is really a significant number of people, really credible voices, who are questioning how we conceive of national security. And they're asking what really threatens us and what really keeps us safe. And there seems to be a consensus forming from people with a range of backgrounds on different sides of the political aisle in the United States and around the world. I think there's a consensus forming that military spending has not been at all matched to today's threats. And we look at here in the United States, the roughly $740 billion in defence spending that really has been no match for the virus. And so I think as we think about how are we spending our money, is it actually matching the threats today? And are there areas of wasteful spending that could really be redirected to addressing pandemics, addressing health, addressing climate change, and addressing really what prevents us and our future generations from being safe and secure? I think this is the right moment. And I do think that with respect to nuclear weapons, this is an area where we do see wasteful spending. We've seen countries like the United States and Russia. We're seeing China increasing its spending on nuclear weapons. I think when we look at this sort of astronomical spending that is projected for modernisation in the United States, really there are serious questions about whether this is actually sustainable and the right thing to do. So I think on the opportunity side here with nuclear weapons, I think the current budgetary crisis that's sort of been brought about by COVID-19 gives a perfect opportunity for us to tackle this head on. And the sort of resource competition in the face of shortages means it's in everybody's interest to pursue arms control.
Picking up on what you said about excess spending in the nuclear area, where do you see opportunities, or other words, unmet needs in the federal budget where nuclear spending should be better directed?
Yeah, and that's a great question, Tom. I think when we look just at the immediate issue that's right in front of us, it's obviously response to the pandemic. and how can we make sure that we address the impacts of COVID-19 and spending money on ensuring that there are better health outcomes for everybody and that we don't see as much disparity and inequality in health outcomes that we're currently seeing. We could also use excess nuclear weapons funds to ensure people's well-being at this time, to really meet their needs and make sure that we help those who've lost their incomes, really, that they don't lose housing and shelter, and that they can be safe at this time. They've got the resources to survive. So I think that's really one area that we can spend that money. That's COVID-19, our immediate crisis. But I think we can also direct some of this excess spending to preparedness for the next pandemic, because really there are going to be more coming, and we've seen just how unprepared we were, despite the fact that epidemiologists have been warning about this for quite some time. So really making sure that we've got the right planning and we've got the right spending in place to address what's coming next is going to be critical. And I think also generally spending on healthcare, education, other issues like criminal justice reform and social justice issues. And really we could be doing more spending on welfare, income supplements, childcare and education in neglected districts. We could spend more money on climate change. So really here, increasing funding for the agencies responsible for addressing climate change, like the Environmental Protection Agency, Departments of Energy and State. And if Americans want to pass sweeping climate legislation, like the Green New Deal, they'll have to get their money from somewhere. And that somewhere is really likely to be the military budget, including nuclear weapons.
You've already mentioned the amount of money that the U.S. spends on nuclear weapons. What should be the top priorities right now for those working to reduce nuclear risks, especially in a time where, we are really focused on the fact that there are so many other areas that need attention in order to keep us safe?
Yeah, I think the top priority really now is for people in the nuclear world to be thinking more holistically about how nuclear weapons fit in or don't to the current environment, and thinking about how can we make common cause with others who share our vision of a more peaceful and secure world, and how can we redirect that spending to these other areas to more meaningfully improve people's lives. So that means actually partnering with people working on issues like social justice and inequality, partnering with people working on climate change, partnering with people who look at budget and resource allocation for healthcare, education, and pandemic response and preparedness. And then I think we need to take a look at what we're really doing with respect to nuclear weapons and what we want our future to look like. Is there a role for nuclear weapons, or is there a way to reimagine the future that we want for ourselves that does not rely on threatening the annihilation of faceless and nameless people on the other side of the world, and it doesn't rely on accepting annihilation of ourselves to keep the peace in return? So I think there are two things we need to be doing here. Clearly, there are really important imperatives for us right now as a nuclear community to look at with respect to specific nuclear policies. So we must save New START, we must get it extended. We must reduce funding for the nuclear arsenal. And we have to resume diplomacy with Iran and North Korea. And this kind of work is going to be relevant no matter who's in the White House in 2021. So there are some essential key priorities that we've got to meet. But I also think if we focus solely on these immediate threats, we really miss making only incremental gains and missing opportunities to determine where we're going in the longer term. So yes, fighting the daily battles is really important, and we need to do that. We also need to take the time to step back and think about where we want to go.
Emma, given all the challenges that we face and as difficult as the current situation is, what, if anything, gives you hope?
Well, the good news, Tom, is that I do have hope. I see a real desire to return the United States to a position of leadership on nuclear weapons. And that's particularly promising as We've really seen a decline in how the US is viewed with respect to leadership over the last few years in general and on nuclear issues. And in particular, we've really seen a decline in trust of the US by its allies with respect to the US commitment to them and their security. And unfortunately, it's really put questions in some people's minds in some countries about whether it might be in their interest to develop their own nuclear arsenals. And this is particularly dangerous. But I do see, however, the potential for repair of this particularly challenging time. Although we do need to recognise, I guess, that damage has been done and repair won't be easy. And we can't return to the way things were before, to the old ways of doing business and thinking. And we really need to tailor responses to the current situation and the future we're entering into. But, I do think it's terrific to see the real willingness to return the US to a position of leadership. And it gives me great hope. And there's something else which is at the level of what's going on in the civil society field. I see a renewed enthusiasm in the nuclear community for taking on big issues, for thinking about different ways of working to be more efficient and effective and partnering with others, and to really have an impact in a new way. And part of this is seeing a willingness to challenge assumptions, which is important given there's such inherent danger in using yesterday's logic to try to address today's problems. I see a willingness to embrace learning from others in different fields and making common cause. And conversely, it's been really terrific to see a number of people from outside the nuclear field become really interested in contributing their expertise to tackling nuclear problems. We see examples of these people working with nuclear professionals in really creative and innovative ways. And I think that's really going to be a way that we see some progress in this sense. And I'm also really heartened to see the willingness of many in the nuclear community at a whole range of levels and from a range of backgrounds to be much more introspective and to look at how the field can be more inclusive and address issues of systemic racism that were within the nuclear sphere. Because really, like so many other areas, the nuclear sphere is not immune to these issues. And really thinking about how we can reduce barriers to entry for Black, Indigenous and people of colour in our field so we can better represent all of those who are impacted by nuclear weapons and people who have been impacted by nuclear weapons, so that we can really ultimately determine better policies that are more in line with values of justice and equality. And it's really terrific to see that the energy is already there, and we see emerging and established professionals from a range of backgrounds increasingly collaborating on how to improve the field. They're having difficult, really difficult but necessary conversations, and the field is becoming more diverse. So I think that when you look at all of these factors, such as making common cause with others in different fields who share our goals, and when you look at learning lessons from other disciplines, working with people who bring unique perspectives in, and really making a more inclusive community, that's how we're going to see breakthroughs in this field. And that's what is really giving me a whole lot of hope right now.
Emma, one last question. We ask this of many of our guests, so I want to pose the same question to you. Why nuclear weapons? How did you pick this as something you would dedicate your career to?
It's a great question. And I often ask myself, why have I dedicated my career to this? It's pretty depressing and I've had my share of nightmares, and I don't know, maybe something else might have been more uplifting. I sometimes wonder whether tax law might have been better. I've got a tax lawyer friend who's going to kill me for saying that, but it's true. Sometimes I do question why not tax law rather than nuclear weapons. But seriously, to answer the question about how I came to this and not tax law, I didn't realise it at the time, but it was really a social studies class in Australia as a 14-year-old that set me on this path. And I remember vividly learning for the first time about nuclear weapons and being really mortified that we'd created this explosive power that could destroy civilization. And it seemed just unfathomable to me. But at the same time, I was kind of fascinated in the sense of the destructive power. But that in itself was very unsettling, and the sort of awe at the bizarre logic that threatening the annihilation of others for your own security and accepting that risk in return was a way to keep the peace. It just seemed really strange, but I understood it at the same time. So I really had a sort of strange, unsettled feeling, and it was something that grabbed at my attention. And I'd love to say that as a 14-year-old, I then dedicated my life to reducing nuclear threat, but it's not quite true. But what I would say is that experience in the classroom as a 14-year-old led me to follow this career that focuses on international relations, international law, the ethics of the use of force, and how nuclear weapons really fit into that. And it's been a common thread throughout my career and studies, and it's led me to right here and right now at Ploughshares. So all jokes aside, I'm glad that I'm not a tax lawyer, and that I'm working on this issue. I think it's really important for us to be tackling. And I'm honoured to be joining Ploughshares and its excellent staff and to be working with the experts in the field who are so dedicated to this topic, passionate about it, and really working to make this world a safer place. So I'm really excited and energised about what we might accomplish together. And I really can't wait to get started.
Emma, thank you very much. This has been a fabulous and instructive and tremendously interesting interview. And we, of course, at Ploughshares as the staff are so thrilled to have you here. And we look forward to challenges and victories ahead. And I'm glad we're doing it together.
Me too, Tom. Thank you so much to you and Michelle. And I look forward to what's to come.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil, Zach Brown, Derek Zender, and Will Lowry. Sound design by Derek Zender. Audio engineering by Derek Zender and Will Lowry. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and the Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit ploughshares.org.